I do not fault myself for telling people at the time what the government was giving us as best practices.
You know, you talk about cancel culture and who to shame. Ivermectin, a dewormer, really?
Everyone's going to say Joe Rogan was right. No, Joe Rogan was saying, yeah, he was right. But that's not what matters.
So today we're going to look at the evolution of the Cuomo brothers. We're going to start with Chris. He went on the PBD podcast and was talking about ivermectin and how he now takes it. Basically, he was defending himself, saying, well, I don't fault myself for putting information out that the government was putting out, even though that is kind of exactly what journalists are supposed to do, is to dig deeper, criticize, and, sort of figure out what the truth is. But since he was just a propagandist at CNN, he's admitting that he was just spouting off whatever the government told him to spout off. And here's a little longer clip than the one I put at the beginning of this video where he's talking about ivermectin on the PBD podcast.
I do not fault myself for telling people at the time what the government was giving us as best practices. People say, but your job is to question. On what basis? The basis of questioning early on was because I say so. Because you don't get to tell me what to do and not do. Fine, I say. You are right. I said it then. However, you can't expect to be everywhere and do everything that the government is controlling. I am taking a, what do they call it? Like a regular dose, whatever. They're trying to build up of ivermectin. Ivermectin was a boogeyman early on in COVID.
You couldn't talk about it.
That was wrong. We were given bad information about ivermectin. The real question is why? Everyone's going to say Joe Rogan was right. No, Joe Rogan was saying, yeah, he was right. But that's not what matters. What matters is the entire clinical community knew that ivermectin couldn't hurt you. They knew it, Patrick. I know they knew it. How do I know? Because now I'm doing nothing but talking to these clinicians who at the time were overwhelmed by COVID and they weren't saying anything. Not that they were hiding anything, but it's cheap, it's not owned by anybody, and it's used as an antimicrobial, antiviral in all of these different ways and has been for a long time.
For malaria for over almost 20 years.
Yeah. So, and my doctor, who is now my doctor, was using it during COVID on her family and on patients, and it was working for them. So they were wrong to play scared on that. Didn't know that at the time, know it now, admit it now, reporting on it now. Because I think that's the job.
As a reference, here's what he was saying on CNN about ivermectin back then.
People who are injecting drugs for animals and horse.
And people telling them to. Oh, my God. What person? You talk about cancel culture and who to shame. Ivermectin, a dewormer, really?
They are shaming themselves. No one has to shame them. They're shaming themselves.
No, they need to be shamed.
Yeah.
They need to be called out and shamed, brother.
At the time, this is pretty much what everybody in cable news was saying. They were mocking people who were using this, including the FDA putting out a tweet telling people to stop using horse dewormer. After that tweet, the FDA was sued, they lost, and they had to delete the tweet.
The FDA has agreed to remove and stop reposting several social media messages suggesting ivermectin, a drug some doctors use to treat COVID, is intended for animals and not humans. The move settles a lawsuit filed by 3 doctors who accused the agency of hurting their medical practices. The lawsuit targeted not only the FDA, but the Department of Health and Human Services. The case was initially dismissed, citing the FDA's sovereign immunity. However, the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit overturned the ruling. The court said the FDA's role is not to provide personalized medical advice. As a result, the FDA will now stop publishing a consumer update titled, "Why You Should Not Use Ivermectin to Prevent COVID-19."
To be fair to Chris, since he moved over to News Nation, he has run segments like this.
Good news is the largest COVID vaccine study to date was just released. 99 million people from around the world. It found that there is an extremely rare but increased risk for certain neurological, heart, blood, and brain disorders after taking the vaccine. They come from my doctor, double board certified physician, long COVID clinical specialist at Terrain Health, Dr. Robin Rose. So you called me about this and said, boy, the headline makes it sound like you got nothing to worry about. The opposite is true. Why?
So
the background of the study is that they looked at, like you said, these 99 million people across 10 sites, 8 countries, and they identified these very significant problems that were neurologic, cardiac or hematologic issues. But these are problems that with any therapeutic or vaccine that is coming out, you wouldn't want to see these issues, right? Or you wouldn't expect to see these issues. And if you did, you'd want to see them at a low rate. And there were a handful that were flagged, as safety signals that were 2 to 3 times higher, when they looked at, they had the expected versus what the observed outcomes would be, and they were 2 to 3 times higher.
And just for the record, to the YouTube censorship police, I am not giving anyone any medical advice. I am simply pointing out that most people in the media are idiots who simply repeat whatever the government tells them to. Now we move on to Chris's brother, former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo. He claimed that during his time as governor, all of the COVID restrictions and regulations that he did were voluntary.
I believe if government were to now say, we just made a finding that there's a new virus and everyone should do X, Y, and Z, the amount of compliance with X, Y, and Z would be much, much lower than it was at the beginning of COVID, because people do not trust the government, especially on this issue, the way they did at the beginning. And that would be a complicating factor, right? When you have people who just don't listen, because government had no capacity to enforce any of this. You must wear a mask. And people wore masks in New York. But if they said, I'm not wearing a mask, there was nothing I could do about it. You must close your private business. I won't. Well, there was nothing I could really do about it. It was really all voluntary, and it was extraordinary when you think about it, that society acted with that uniformity voluntarily, because I had no enforcement capacity. So you have a reduced trust in government.
It was not extraordinary. It was frightening how quickly people just accepted the orders of their government, despite how ridiculous they were.
Be smart. I get it. I understand it. It's wrong. It's wrong. My advice on Thanksgiving? Don't be a turkey. You don't want to be the turkey on Thanksgiving. You know what love is on Thanksgiving? I love you so much, and I'm so thankful for you that I'm not going to see you. That's how you show me you love me. I'm not going to see you. That's how much I love you.
My mom is going to come up, and 2 of my girls is the current plan. But the plans change, but that's my plan.
I didn't want to disappoint my mother. 89 years old, she's thinking, how many Thanksgivings do I get?
After facing a wave of criticism, Governor Cuomo changes his Thanksgiving plans. In a Monday interview, the governor said his 89-year-old mother and his 2 daughters, 2 of them, would be joining him in Albany for the holiday. Social media went crazy over that, as Cuomo has been warning New Yorkers about the dangers of spreading COVID with family members who don't live with you. The governor now says he plans to work on Thanksgiving.
This can go on for several months, okay? Nobody can tell you, is it 4 months, 6 months, 8 months, 9 months? But it is several months. We all have to now confront that is a new reality. That is not going to change. You're not going to turn on the news tomorrow morning and they're going to say, surprise, surprise, this is all now resolved in 2 weeks. That is not going to happen. So deal with this reality. Understand the negative effects of this, which I've spoken to personally, because these are personally negative effects. You don't feel them governmentally. You feel them personally. You feel them in your own life. And don't underestimate the emotional trauma, and don't underestimate the pain of isolation.
I'm going to leave this video off with Chris Cuomo lecturing everyone in his basement about quarantine. while he was actually out checking his beach house.
No matter where the virus goes, the way to stop it will always be the same. Our collective conscientious actions. Staying home. All right, here it is. The official re-entry from the basement. Cleared by CDC. A little sweaty. Just worked out. Happens. This is what I've been dreaming of, literally for weeks.
It turns out that at that moment, he was breaking quarantine himself, despite, as we said, being positive for the coronavirus. One day, Cuomo was spotted by a passing bicyclist who got into a tiff with him.
I don't want some jackass, loser, fat tire biker to be able to pull over and get in my face and in my space and talk to me. I don't want to hear it.
David Whalen is the jackass, loser, fat-tired biker in question, the cyclist Chris Cuomo tangled with.
I'm like, holy smokes, it's Chris Cuomo. I'm fairly outspoken, and I just said, don't you have the coronavirus? Shouldn't you be quarantined? And I think his next words were, what the hell do you know about this? What do you know about the rules? Basically, I just said, you have coronavirus. What are you doing out here? You're supposed to be home. But he told me he was going to meet me, and he goes, you're going to meet me over this. You will meet me again over this.
Everyone's going to say Joe Rogan was right. No, Joe Rogan was saying, yeah, he was right.